Welcome to the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm your host, Robin L. Owens, PhD, and this is where we dive in each week to give advice, tools, and tips for high-achieving women who have written books that make a difference for people while at work. I am a professor, and when I'm not doing that, I am speaking, writing, coaching, and teaching high-achieving women who have written books how to make a bigger difference, have more impact, and more purpose with their books. Okay, let's dive in. Before we get started with the episode, I want to ask you a question. Is your book ready to be turned into a successful online course? That's a question so many people have asked me. And so I decided to create a free resource to answer that very question. I took the time-tested process that I use for turning books into successful online courses, and I created a checklist that you can review and check off so you know the ways in which your book can be turned into a successful online course. So just head on over to createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and get your free checklist there. All right, now let's get to the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and that you take time to listen into the podcast. And because you've been listening in, we have been rated in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to the podcast search engine Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. And because you've been avid listeners to the podcast, I ask you to do one more thing. Go on over, review, rate, subscribe to the podcast. That'll really help us out. So thank you again. Now, today, I'm talking with Ann Louden. Now, let me tell you about Ann. She's a philanthropy professional and board leader, an author, consultant, nationally recognized speaker, and so much more, which she'll tell you about. But the thing that I want to highlight here today is that she delights and is excellent at writing about how to be an effective connector. And she's written 2 books. One's here and one's on the way, which we'll hear more about. But her first book, written under the pen name Kate Somerset, shows how to build unforgettable relationships in a social setting. And I'll tell you the title of that, and she'll tell you more about it. But stay tuned. Listen to this title. Mom, you just need to get laid. The Adventures of Dating After Divorce. And her upcoming book, the next book, will focus on how to be an effective connector in the workplace, boardroom, family, or community. And the title of that book is From Social Courage to Connection, Lessons from Leaders Who Change and Save Lives. So you can hear from both books that she is an effective connector and she wants us all to be one. So let us now welcome Ann Louden.
Robin, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be connected to you and feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to talk about these books with your listening audience. So thanks again.
I'm so glad you're here and I'm looking forward to jump right into this conversation. So let's go. Now, I just talked a little bit about in your introduction, but now you tell us in your own words about who you are and what you do.
My background in my entire career has been nonprofit work. I have been an administrator in a university setting for a very long time before that was in Texas, where I was for 30 years. And then I moved to New York City and opened my own consulting practice. And in that role, I have 3 niche opportunities that I engage with clients about. The first is board governance, because almost no nonprofit can be successful without an effective board structure and really talented board leaders who are committed to the cause and the mission. The second area is helping volunteers, that would be board members and others, and staff build those effective relationships to solicit gifts, because the area that is my expertise is fundraising. And the third is helping organizations create really stretch and meaningful strategic planning. And so in that role, as a consultant, I work with clients that have all kinds of missions, and I'm fascinated by the good work that people do around the country for causes that they believe in. So that's my work background, and out of that came my interest in thinking about books. But I know you'll get to that next question.
Yes, yes. But when you say philanthropy, and I so appreciate that, it just occurred to me while you were saying that I was impacted early in my young professional career. We had I grew up in a house in Connecticut that my family owned, and the house was completely destroyed by fire. And we found ourselves standing on the curb with nowhere to go. And out of nowhere, somebody from the American Red Cross showed up and helped us for the night because everything was destroyed. We had no ID or anything. Fortunately, everyone was okay. And so they showed up and we got settled as time passed on. Fast forward about 5 years later, this is speaking to the philanthropy piece. I had an opportunity. I was working for a bank. Again, this is back in Connecticut, working for a bank. And then part of my role, they sent me to work with the American Red Cross as a loaned executive. So they loaned the executives to the American Red Cross to then raise funds for others. And so I'm still an employee of the bank, but went along with other people from the area in this loaned executive program, about 12 of us. And we went to different organizations in the city and raised funds for the American Red Cross under the umbrella of the United Way. And it was one of the most fulfilling roles I ever had in my life. Just sharing my story and inviting others to make a contribution in that way. So I share that story to say there's something about the heart of fundraising. And I know it's different in what you do, but at the heart of it, this idea of helping people help others is really meaningful to me. So I appreciate that part of you and your work.
Well, you came full circle to have the experience that you had with your family's fire, which makes me think about the struggles people in Hawaii are having today with the terrible news about the devastation of Lahaina. I've been thinking a lot in the last 48 hours, where are the nonprofits? Who's there to help? I know there's some national efforts and state efforts, but back to your role with United Way, for you to be able to articulate what that experience with the American Red Cross meant for you and your family, and then to be able to put those thoughts into words to help others really make a commitment to a cause that you knew so well is a real gift. I am a breast cancer survivor, and for a number of years, I was involved as a volunteer and helping raise money for the Susan G. Komen Foundation, which is a nationally known breast cancer research and advocacy organization. And because I had gone through the terror and the challenge of a diagnosis and the treatment that followed, and the experience of being a survivor, all the things that are part of the journey, I was able to talk about it in a different way than had I been a volunteer recruited because I cared about the cause, but hadn't experienced the circumstances that made me understand the cause better. So I'm glad you shared that story, because it really is meaningful when we can actually experience the mission that we're raising money for.
Yes, yes. And you mentioned full circle, and I appreciate you sharing your story and learning that you have that connection. And interestingly enough, now I'm in the process of possibly joining the board of the American Red Cross here in the Los Angeles region. So it really is a full circle moment for me.
Well, good for you. We should talk about that, because I think being a board member is one of the greatest responsibilities we can take on. And to do it really well involves a lot of time and attention. But organizations desperately need talented leaders to serve in that volunteer capacity.
Okay, yeah, we'll definitely talk about that because I definitely could learn from your expertise. Okay, all right. So now let's talk about the first book, the book that's out now. Maybe we'll get time, hopefully, to talk about the one that's coming up. But let's talk about the first book. Remind everybody again of the title of the book, and then talk about the premise of the book.
Well, the title is racy. The book is PG, but the title itself is meant to obviously interest people in reading the book. And the title was given to me by my daughter. I didn't make it up. I wrote the book and then asked her for permission to use the title because I needed something that I thought was going to fit the storyline. The title of the book is Mom, You Just Need to Get Laid. The Adventures of Dating After Divorce. And when I was in the middle of a divorce, and my daughter, who was then a teenager, was doing the typical mother-daughter fighting that happens with with mothers and daughters, teenagers particularly, she wanted to shock me. I think she wanted to throw out a salvo that was meant to throw me off my game. And so there was a night when she had a lot of her friends over, and she didn't like the invitation I had that they needed to leave the room I was working in and go to another space. And she finally, after telling me I was bossy and needed to get a life and quit working so hard, because that's what I was doing in the room she was in with her friends, she turned and looked at me as she walked out of the room with her entourage, and she said, "You know, Mom, you just need to get laid." And the point being that I didn't have a life, and that was her way of interpreting what a life might look like. So I actually the book is nonfiction. It's 15 stories, 15 men. They're all true stories. Even the conversation in the book is written from real life text chains that I saved from meeting these 15 different people. And it came about because I had exited Texas, which is where my daughter and was growing up, and that's where that title came from, when I still lived there. And as I mentioned, I left institutional fundraising and higher ed, and I went to New York and started my own company. That was the hardest move and the best move I've ever made in my life. It was the scariest thing I'd ever done. I'm starting my own company, ending up in a community that I don't know. And New York is a whole different culture and a whole different set of expectations that are required for those who live there. And I'm meeting people for the first time that are not only going to be people I'm going to be working with, but socially, I have to create a whole new community. And so one of the things that I decided to do sort of last minute was date. I really, after this long marriage of 24 years, never really thought that was in the cards for me. But it was a way to build community. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I thought this would be fun. And so it began. And as I would tell newly identified girlfriends in New York about my stories, they said, "You've got the craziest experiences. We've heard dating stories, and then we hear your stories, and you need to write those down." So I've written all my life for work-related reasons, but never written a book. And so I began thinking about the challenge, which seemed like a dare to me, which I love. I love being challenged and stretched. So I thought, well, I'll just write one story and see if it flies with about 20 people who could read it and tell me if it meant something, if it's entertaining, and if they enjoyed it. And so I did. That story's not in the book, by the way, but it was a true story. And from the encouragement I got from their feedback, I thought, okay, well, I'll do it. And so I selected 15 of the men that I had gone out with. And that sounds like a big number, but the number that I went out with is a lot bigger than that, because, I'm in a big community, 8 million people in New York. And I treated dating as I treat everything in my life. I was going to do this well. I was going to figure out how to spend the time to get to know people, which is my mantra, the whole connection thing you mentioned earlier. And so I put the book together, wrote it under a pen name, because remember, my brand is the leadership brand, the work that I've done in the nonprofit community. And frankly, I was a little nervous about whether that brand could be interpreted incorrectly if I had my name on a dating book. Nobody would have expected that. But I did reveal just this year that, because the book was published during COVID, that I am the author. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive, which thrilled me because I was nervous about it. So there's a little backstory for you.
That's a wonderful story. I have 25 questions that are all trying to compete to come out right now. They're all competing. Okay, let me try to go back to the original questions that came to my mind. All right, so you mentioned, I couldn't let this go. You said 15 men, 15 stories, and there were many more. Are you going to tell us the number of the total men?
Well, I'll say this, that if you read the book, in the introduction of the book, in which I explain the title and the reason I decided to write it, I say that I went out with more than double the number of years I was married, the number of men. That was awkwardly stated, but the point being that I was married 24 years. I went out with more than double 24 people. So they'll give you a number. Now that doesn't mean that I dated of those people, that I dated them extensively or for a length of time. But for the 15 men that ended up in the book, I chose them because I wanted the book to be entertaining. First of all, I wanted people to understand that there are so many ways we relate to different kinds of people and personalities as part of being a connector, to legitimately have intellectual curiosity about other people and who they are and what their life stories are and what their challenges are and what they're looking for in their lives. And so I wanted to find 15 really different, diverse people in my experience. But I also had to have an arc of a story. I had to have enough text chains, enough conversation, enough interesting adventures, which is the subtitle of the book, that it would make for a great chapter. And I'm so thrilled that people who've read the book find that it creates all kinds of emotions for them. They're amused, they're encouraged, they're inspired. They feel, many have said there's several stories that are sad to them. Some are shocking, but all of it is true. And there's really not another book out there like this. Yes, there's Sex in the City, but those are all made up stories. Mine are not. They're really true.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And also, you have 15 stories, 15 men, and 15 song titles. Tell us about that.
Well, the tone of the book is lighthearted and fun. And so every chapter has an illustration. Every chapter is a man. The names are changed. And so in fact, it's hard for me to remember what their real names are because I gave name, and it's only typically first names. So, there's Saul the sailor and Braden the banker and Anderson the actor, and I could go on with all 15. But anyway, for each chapter, I thought, well, this needs the formatting, the look of the book needs to be really entertaining. And so I had for every chapter, the book has a publisher, but I took the extra step of asking an illustrator to hand draw an image that represented a clue, an Easter egg into what was in the chapter. And the other Easter egg is the song title. And they're all song titles that but they're tied to the particular arc of that story. So it's fun. The audiobook actually was voiced by a Broadway actress who's just extraordinary. She's got a fantastic voice. And because I'd written under a pen name, I couldn't do the audiobook. And so when she begins a new chapter, she reads the chapter name and the song title, which is really fun. I love hearing it actually come alive that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine people right now want to jump right away and get the book or even listen to it right away. It's so exciting. I would imagine. I want it right now. Stop, go listen.
I'd love to get back about it.
And I definitely will do that. But since we're here, let's finish this conversation because I want to go do that now. All right. So give us, now that we said that let's do one more thing to help people get a little sneak peek in the book. One of the men or one of the experiences, say a little something about maybe, I don't want to say the one that strikes you the most, because I don't want them to compete in case they're listening. I don't favor that one over the other. But how about one that comes to mind in particular, the experience and the lesson that came from it?
Okay, I'd love to do that. There's one of the men I renamed Stefan because I needed to I always have alliteration for these men's names. So he's Stefan the scholar, and who he really is in person is a speaker, an internationally known speaker. And I encountered him at by the way, all these stories are based in New York. And I'm the newcomer to New York. So remember, I'm just figuring out how to live there, how to thrive there, how to make my life work professionally and socially. So I went to a conference at the Marriott Marquis, which is in Times Square. And he was one of the speakers for this audience of 1,000 people. I had seen his photo and the description of his talk in the program prior to my selecting. You've been to those conferences where there are many, many people in breakouts, and this was not a breakout session. This was a plenary session. But at any rate, I had already been attracted to the topic. He is a scientist, and his expertise is in understanding how the brain works to inspire loyalty. And so it primarily he consults with major companies. So because they have brands and they're trying to get their brands understood and accepted by the general public who buy the product. So that's the general idea. But the topic may sound dry, or it may sound interesting to you the way I described it, but let me tell you what, he was an off the charts, fantastic speaker. Plus, he was really handsome. And so the two things together made me convinced, as I was hearing him go through this presentation, that I had to meet him. So I figured out that there would be a 15-minute break between his talk and the next one. And this ballroom is enormous at the hotel. So I was on one side of the room in the front, but he was going to come down a different staircase on the other side of the room. So I hauled it. I just decided that this was going to be my mission. I had to get in line and talk to him. So I made it, but there was a huge line ready to introduce themselves to him. And I was aware that there was a moderator that was keeping people in check, staying in line, talking to him and moving them through. And just as I got up to him, the moderator put an elbow in front of me and said, "We're out of time. He's got to step away." And this gentleman said, "I'll talk to her," which was a gift but then I'm tongue tied. I have no idea what I'm going to say to him. I just knew I wanted to meet him. And so I began by saying, I'm telling you honestly, that's one of the best presentations I ever heard. It was funny. It was insightful. It was intriguing. I want to hear it again, but you missed something. And he said, "What did I miss?" And I said, "Well, you talked about brand loyalty and building trust. But I think the topic you could have talked about was what it means to build trust in online dating." And he said, "Oh, are you an expert?" And I said, "Well, I'm single. I just moved to Manhattan and I've been dating, so I guess I am." And so I handed him my business card and I thought if he didn't follow up with me, which I seriously doubted, I would follow up with him because I knew how to reach him. I got an email from him the next day when I was back in the conference, sitting in front of, the stage, looking at my phone, and subsequently we went out. There's more to this story. In fact, every one of these chapters, there's really more to the story than what is in the book. But he was someone that truly was, like, for me, a teenage heartthrob. I looked at him. I barely could stand, on my own 2 feet. And there's a serendipitous part of his story and his chapter, which includes the fact that I checked on him recently, sent him a text, and learned that he had cancer, which I did not know. And I wouldn't have known had I not been in touch with him. And he knew that I had been through cancer. And so I was able to offer him some encouragement. These things happen in our lives in the strangest of ways. And I'm so glad I was able to that I am able to currently play a bit of a role to be supportive.
Yeah, that's beautiful that you reached out and that you're able to do that. Yeah, that's beautiful. But I love that story because you were on a mission and you set your sight on a goal and you were going to complete that goal. And as it turned out, it worked in the way that worked for you. That's a wonderful story. I mean, if that's an indicator of the book, everybody should run out and get the book right now, this moment.
Well, Amazon will send it to you overnight. So that'll work.
Yes, it'll be here right away. All right. So now let's talk about your move from Texas to New York, because this connection, you really had to use your skills as a connector when you moved to New York. Did you have those skills already when you were in Texas, or was it brand new when you got there?
That's a great question. I had been told a lot of my professional career that I was a determined connector, that I would find meaning in getting to know people, and then I would try to figure out how to connect A to B. Somebody compared me once to an old-fashioned telephone switchboard operator who's pulling the plugs and, pulling the plug for A and the B and connecting it to C. And I was flattered by that, because I'd like to think that if I can be helpful to someone, based on my introducing them to another person I know that could benefit from that relationship, that's my obligation. That's my duty. That's my privilege. And so I had been told that. And I knew that that would be the saving grace for me going to New York. If there was a way that I could employ those skills, identify them, one, and put them to work for me, that I could feel not alone, that I could figure out how to make my way. And so I would say to you that I probably had never tested them like they got tested in that moment when I moved to New York and all the days that followed. But I did think I had an ability to build relationships, to make friends without an agenda, and to embrace new people and new friendships.
That's wonderful. I mean, I can only imagine the challenge of that. I mean, my move wasn't as drastic. I moved from Connecticut to New York, and I was in a master's degree program. So I had a little built-in community from the other graduate students there. So I can only imagine what that was for you and how you were able to use your skills to really make that connection. See what I did there? No pun
You
intended.
did a good, you did a good thing right there. I saw that.
All right, so now let's talk about Little Ann. Was there any indication of Little Ann that when you were a child that this little connector piece was inside of you? Were you the one in kindergarten connecting people, trading candy, or in high school or anywhere in your young life? Do you see any indications or hints that this might have been emerging?
No, in fact, nobody's asked me that question, but it's such a great question because I have scratched my head and wondered where this need to be a connector came from. When I was a child, I was painfully shy. I would say about myself now that I am extroverted, but I certainly was not as a child. And up until probably even through my teenage years, when I got to college, it might have shifted for me because I took on leadership positions that required me to be in the front of the room, and that there was some comfort for me in being a leader, whether I was a self-promoted leader. I volunteered for a lot of leadership roles, or whether I was an elected leader. But either way, I think when you are in a leadership role, you have a level of authority and credibility that makes being in a room of people that you don't know more comfortable. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's really how I see my growing comfort with connecting people happening. That I was able to have a platform that existed because I was serving in some capacity that had respect and authority associated with it. And then from that point of view, I was able to build relationships and people would believe that I could be helpful to them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I could see that, and I experienced that presence with you. I mentioned this to you in the past, but you have that presence. It's just something about your being.
Well, thank you. I think we all bring an energy level that it's probably hard to describe it, but we ought to think about what that energy level is because it does suggest to us what leadership roles we might want to have and what might want to take.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about your author self, your
All right.
author role. You have all these. To me, you have many gifts and abilities. So let's talk about the author because I'm imagining the people who are listening primarily are what I call high achieving women. And what I mean by that, they're ambitious, goal oriented, responsible at work, responsible at home. They're the ones that people come to for support, either at work or at home. And on top of all that, doing all the things, they wrote a book, at least one. So that's the person we're speaking to. So in that regard, I just want to shift to your author self. Now, what would you say has been the greatest joy about getting your book, this first book, out into the world, into the hands of others?
Without a doubt, the greatest joy has come this year since I did the author reveal from my pen name to my name. Obviously, the book still is written by Kate Somerset, and that is my pen name. But when I actually could connect to readers who told me how much they loved the book, it has been so gratifying. If I could just sit in small groups and talk to people about what they most liked about the book and tell the stories that are in the book, it would be my best days. And I always welcome those opportunities. I think anybody that's written a book and discovers that it means something to someone finds it very fulfilling. I didn't know what that was going to be like. Honestly, as I said, I was a little nervous about whether my name associated with this book, because it is such a unique book, would be compelling or interesting. And I think the fact that people find great satisfaction in reading it is lots of fun for me. So that's joyful.
Yes, it sounds like it. Does any come to mind? Is there a situation or some comments that you heard from people that come to mind now that you could share?
Oh, I have many, but today I had lunch with a woman who is younger than I. She's in her early 40s with young children, and she's just gotten a divorce. And my book, by the way, is not just for women who've gotten divorced. It is have had many people who are married who've enjoyed the stories and loved the lessons that are in the book. I've had young singles who are just starting to date and trying to figure out what it means to actually create boundaries and build relationships authentically. And then, of course, I've had a lot of people that are single and trying to figure out what they're doing next. And so this young woman that I had lunch with today said to me, I read your book last year when I was going through the worst part of my divorce experience. And I thought to myself, I will never date. I can't do what she, meaning me, I can't do what she did. And then she said, I got your book back out once my divorce was final in May. And I thought, well, I can do this. She's given me a roadmap. And she said, I just want you to know that I've been inspired by what you taught me, and I'm dating. And I said, well, good for you. I love hearing those stories. But there are other stories. One other quick one. I have a friend who has a husband has an unfortunately, early dementia diagnosis. It's been tragic. He was a partner in a major law firm in Texas, and he was someone who was a community leader. And then their lives have turned upside down because now he's institutionalized and she's trying to keep her family together. And so we recently reconnected, and she had written a book about Alzheimer's, and we shared our stories. And she said, I can't picture that I would ever date again, because she knows he's not going to live much longer. That was her first reaction to me. 3 months later, we met again, and she said, you know what? I'm thinking your message is right, that there is no end to the opportunities we have in our lives if we'll give ourselves a chance. And so she said, when the time comes, I'm going to ask your help. And I said, happy to be there for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Is that the primary premise of the book, that there's endless opportunities, or what's the premise of the book?
Yeah. I think yes, it's close to that. The primary message of the book is to not shut doors for yourself, is to be open to whatever possibilities there are in life. And if it means taking a big risk, if you can see on the other side that there's something that you can't imagine that could be better for your life, to step into that place. I could have easily stayed in Texas in fact, everybody assumed I would stay in Texas. I was a fixture there. Nobody dreamed I would leave. And so my leaving was the boldest thing I could have done for myself. And it was the scariest thing, as I said earlier, that I could have ever thought to do. Not only because I was going to a new place, but financially, I was really in a situation where I had to figure out, how was I going to make all this work? And so I could have done the easier thing, which was to stay where I was, where I already had a reputation, already had things figured out. But I didn't want that for myself. I wanted something much bigger. And so big meant that I had to step around a corner I couldn't see.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is very courageous.
Well, I think everybody needs to think we're not limited. There's no fast and hard rule that says this part of my life was so challenging, I just need to hunker down. I don't believe in hunkering down. I believe in stepping forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you stepped forward and started your own business when you arrived in New York. Was that the intent of going, in addition to the change in your marital status?
I started the business because, again, in the nonprofit world that I had been in my entire career, I needed to be able to work, I felt like in my own way with clients representing their causes as opposed to me working in an institution. I wanted the flexibility to do that.
Mm.
And so that's part of the reason I did. But I had a couple of clients that were interested in working with me, but they wanted to work with me as a contractor. So that's how it really all began.
Yeah, yeah. They saw what you were offering and they wanted more of that, basically. Yeah.
Well, fortunately for me, those opportunities got me to New York. They made it possible for me to go there, and it was a wonderful, enriching experience for me.
And I think I mentioned the woman who I thought was listening to the podcast primary. There's lots of people who listen to the pod, different people. There was a man who lives not too far from me. He says, "Hey, I listen to your podcast all the time." I'm like, "You do?" So that's
Our well, whoever you are, sir, I'm glad you're listening.
exactly, exactly. Okay, but I created a podcast to support the high achieving woman that I described earlier. So given that woman that I mentioned, what's some advice or words of wisdom or tips that you can give either from your professional life or from your personal experience of life that just would support another high achieving woman?
I learned myself more about me from people who told me about me than I could ever have imagined. And so, what I would say in explaining that answer to your audience is that we should always listen to what others say about ourselves. Like you said to me a bit ago, which I'm appreciative of and very flattered by, that I have a certain presence. I've heard that in my life. I don't know that I could have defined it, but it meant something to me because it told me if that is in fact a reality, what can I do with that? Where does that serve me? People say things about you, Robin, and you members of the audience that hold a mirror up to you that you might not be able to articulate. And when high achieving women have both so many gifts and so many challenges, it's hard to be good at every aspect that is in your life, professionally, personally, whatever that third place is in your life. It's not your work. What's the other part of your identity? All of those are big questions. But people will help define that. Those who observe you will know who you are and speak that truth back to you. And so my advice to all of us is listen to what people are saying about you and take that to heart and use that to your advantage.
Yes, yes, I appreciate that. Okay, so now the podcast is called Leadership Purpose. Do you think it's important for people in general or you to have a sense of purpose in your work or guided by a purpose or any connection to purpose? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
I'd be surprised if anybody on your podcast ever said, no, it's not important. I think the lay down question, which is, of course, it is important for you to find deeper meaning in your life by finding a way to give back. That is what the world of philanthropy is about. It's about giving back to a cause that's far greater than yourself. We only have this limited time on earth without being too philosophical about it. And we create a legacy. What remains after we're not here anymore is the legacy we created through the work that we've done. And I can't think of a more important purpose in life than to work for a cause that's significantly greater than ourselves. I can never achieve on my own. I can't lead an effort that's as large as the nonprofits that I work with, but if I'm representing that mission, I can certainly make that nonprofit stronger. And so your upcoming work on the American Red Cross board and all the ways you're involved in your community must feel meaningful to you. I would be very sad if I just got up every day, worked for reasons that didn't have a purpose behind them necessarily, and went to bed, did it all over again. I think that sounds really dull.
Yeah, yeah, it would for me too. Yeah. I mean, and you have been so generous with your time and your stories. I really appreciate you. Is there something that I didn't get a chance to ask you about? Maybe the upcoming book or something else that you want to talk about before we tell people how they can be in touch with you?
Well, I could talk to you for a long time, for hours, but I'll just I'll give you a quick answer to that. I think that we all need to recognize that we go through seasons in our lives where challenges present themselves in big ways that can be very disheartening. And when we hit one of those times in our lives, think of it as a roller coaster. And when you're at the bottom of the roller coaster and you're struggling to ever figure out what this all means, if we can just remember that we need to step out of our heads and think, what are the lessons I'm learning right now? What in this moment of great difficulty can I extract one bit of meaning that will help me figure out how to get out of this slump and move to the next thing? When I was divorced, it was a very difficult time. And out of that time, I hatched this big dream of going to New York and starting over, really, second chapter. And the lesson for me was that I had enough internal strength to be able to actually pull it off.
Yeah.
And I was stepping out, looking at myself from the ceiling, trying to imagine, can you, Anne, do this? And it worked out that I could, but it only was because I was talking to myself as if I were a third person. And there are lessons every step of the way that we encounter in our lives. And we listen to them and learn from them, we can be a lot stronger through those challenges.
Yes, and you're a living testimony for that, right before our ears and eyes. And
Well,
oh, go
sure, I'll
ahead.
have a lot more challenges, but I hope I can learn lessons from them.
Yes, yes. Well, I appreciate you, and I'm guessing that the listeners do as well. And for those who are like, okay, I want to get the book and I want to know more, how can they be in touch with you?
Well, for the book, which again is called Mom, You Just Need to Get Laid, The Adventures of Dating After Divorce, it is on Amazon. That's the fastest way you can get it, as an ebook, a print book, and the audiobook as well. And the author's name is Kate Somerset. Kate is my middle name, and Somerset was the building I lived in New York. So there you have that. If you want to email me directly, I would be more than happy to answer any questions related to the book or anything else. And I'm easy to get. It's just Ann, A-N-N, at Ann Louden, which is LOUDEN.com. So Ann at AnnLouden.com.
Okay, that's wonderful. We'll be sure to have that in the show notes as well as your website. And thank you so much for spending time. Like you said, I can talk to you all day and all night, and I know you have lots of things to do, but this has been a joy. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, everyone. And if you want to, I would love to hear from you. Let me know what you think about the episode. Send me a message over on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have a book that you've written and you want to get your message out further and just share your message beyond the book with a course, I can help you with that. Head on over to my website, createmasterfulcourses.com, createmasterfulcourses.com, and I have a resource for you. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. If you enjoyed it, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop every week, and I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Meanwhile, this is Dr. Robin signing off. See you next time.